Is the keto diet dampening in Chinese medicine? Is it a healthy diet? These meats are fatty meat. Those things cause dampness. And something you have to constantly consider is not just that food in isolation, but that food within the whole diet. They go on a keto diet and they lose weight. They lose physical volume from their body. They're losing yin. And so that means their body has to have mobilized more yang to digest that yin, to transform that yin, to get rid of the fat, right? So I think from that perspective, you could say that that diet is better for your digestion, which means it's less dampening. Is the keto diet dampening in Chinese medicine? Is it a healthy diet? I'm Marie Hopkinson, Chinese medicine practitioner. I'm an acupuncturist and herbalist. And today on the channel, I'm going to be answering one of the subscribers' questions about the keto diet and dampness. So let's get into the video. If you're not a subscriber already, make sure you click that subscribe button. And you will never regret it because you'll never miss a video from me. So if you like this channel and you like the content, make sure you subscribe, and because I'm making videos. This question has a little disclaimer at the start of it. Another one. These are my opinions. So this is probably not the general consensus of all Chinese medicine practitioners, and certainly not what you would see in a stock standard Chinese medicine book. This person's question, they say it's full of fat, right? It's a high fat kind of diet. How could that not be dampening in Chinese medicine? So I'm going to discuss my opinions and why I think what I think, and then you're free to have your own opinions about it as well. Please put them in the comments below if you think something different, you think, oh Marie, you're way off base here with this, or that's a really interesting point, then maybe pop that in the comments. One of the really important things to understand about Chinese medicine is it's generally, most of the answers are not an either or question, like it's good for me, it's bad for me. If you have too much of anything, that's detrimental to you. So this is my opinion. Another one. And what am I basing it on? Basing it on my years of experience in Chinese medicine, in treating patients using Chinese diet therapy, and using foods and things like that, and looking at what patterns of disharmony happen when patients adopt different diets. That's one way of observing Chinese diet therapy, and also on yourself. And to think about what those individual foods do in a Chinese medicine way as well. Now, that's where when you would read, okay, in the keto diet, there's a lot of high fat foods. And if you just look up those foods individually, then they'll say, well, fat is dampening, or fat can cause dampness. Or we can think of things in terms of yin and yang. Has a food got a lot of yin? Has it got a lot of yang? And if you've been on this channel a little bit already, you may have watched some of the videos I've done about yin and yang in foods, about the basics of digestion. So that's one way to think about diet and the foods. Basically think about the properties of the individual foods contained on that diet, or what you would commonly be eating. Secondly, the style of cooking that you do. So if you eat a high fat, high protein diet, which you would on the keto diet, then the cooking methods that you do on that diet could also make it more or less dampening. So if you use a lot of frying, let's say you're making these keto patties that I've seen, or keto fritters, I think they call them. They're fried in oil, so they're all low carb vegetables with egg and almond flour, stuff like that. And so you fry them in oil. They taste delicious, but that frying method is a dampening method versus a cooking method where you are stewing or making a soup. Those cooking methods are not as dampening for sure. They're more healthier kind of cooking methods. So that's one thing to consider, what kind of cooking methods the person's using on the diet as well, not just simply the foods that are consumed. And then there's also probably another more unhealthy thing you could do in terms of a keto diet, where a person would eat a lot more packaged and processed things. That certainly would cause a more dampening effect. Fucking helicopter. Little disclaimer, right? This is my opinion. It's not necessarily the shared opinion of all Chinese medicine practitioners. Another one. And But I think it's important as a practitioner and as a student of Chinese medicine even to have that mindset of, okay, let's think about the ancient concepts of Chinese medicine, how they'd be applied to modern problems and the modern day diets and things like that. So right up front, I want to say I don't think that the keto diet in itself causes dampness. I don't think it's a dampening diet. And you might say, what, Marie? But it's full of fat. There's so much fat on that diet. Now, this is the reason why I don't think it's dampening, is because when you think about your digestive system in a Chinese medicine way, go back to that example I said in one of the videos where you've got the spleen and stomach as the cooking pot on the stove. So this is this stomach as a little pot, and you've got the spleen as the fire below the pot, doing the job of digestion. So that separating that pure and impure, that doing that job of digestion, if you can make that easier for the body, then you don't get dampness. The harder that is for the body, the more likely you are to get dampness. Now, how does that work? Because what happens is the more difficult to digest foods you put in the stomach, the harder the spleen has to work. And over time, that's how you get dampness. From a digestive perspective, there can be other reasons why a person could get dampness, but from their diet. Now, the predominant way this happens is through processed foods. And most of these things would contain wheat, gluten, and sugar. So if you're taking sugar and carbs out of the diet, so you're taking wheat, bread, and these kind of processed grains out of the diet, and sugar, so especially when those two things are combined together. And then I think thirdly, especially when you have like the processed grains, so you have wheat, flour, or any kind of flour really, and then sugar, and then you have trans fats, which is a kind of processed fats that are in like lots of cookies and packaged biscuits, those shapes and things like that, those snacks that are really moreish where people just eat so much of that stuff. Makes it really, really tasty. Like the person likes to eat it, but then they don't feel full. When you have the combination of those three, that's like a perfect storm for dampness. One is because it's that empty calorie thing of like, yeah, okay, it's not empty calories. You're putting on weight from eating that stuff, but you're not getting the sustenance that your body needs. So it's like turning your spleen and stomach into a consuming machine, into a digestive machine, if you like. So if a person was to previously have a diet like that, so a lot of people that go to a keto diet is to lose weight or to maintain their weight, to stop putting on weight, right? And so they have come from typically a higher carb. Most people don't go from another low carb to a keto diet. They usually, like, maybe you could make a shift, let's say, from a paleo diet to a keto diet. But if you were making that shift from a situation where that person's overweight, they go on a keto diet and they lose weight, they lose physical volume from their body. They're losing yin. And so that means their body has to have mobilized more yang to digest that yin, to transform that yin, to get rid of the fat, right? So I think from that perspective, you could say that diet is better for your digestion, which means it's less dampening. So how do you get dampness? If your spleen and stomach aren't working well together, your digestive fire, your earth yang, or your spleen qi, however you want to think of it, if that gets weaker and that's dwindling, it's harder for your body to transform whatever you put in there, and then you put on weight. Dampness is partly that, but also some people don't get fat, they just get cloudy headed. They get very lethargic, they get very sleepy and tired. They have to lie down, but their limbs, typically with dampness, your limbs are heavy. And the more deficient you are, the more your spleen or your earth is weaker and weaker, the more you would have those symptoms of like, not so much dampness, but the qi deficiency symptoms, or the weakness of that earth element kind of symptoms. So you would be more like you need to lie down and just have a sleep, rather than just feeling foggy headed and you can keep going in your day. So these two things are kind of intrinsically related. And I can't remember if it was the same person that asked that question, but that was recently also a question on this channel, like, Marie, is dampness related to spleen qi deficiency? And I was like, yes, it is. It's like, it's essentially you can't really get damp unless your spleen can't digest. Like, the reason you're getting damp is because the spleen isn't digesting what you put into it. Now, in a one-off occurrence, it can happen because the food you've eaten, like this can happen with food poisoning, for instance. Just getting a little off topic here, but just go with me. don't complain that I'm getting off topic, because it is related. So let's say you ate something with food poisoning in it, and you got salmonella food poisoning. You would have the symptoms of dampness because that food is so toxic that your spleen can't digest it, and so you have like sudden diarrhea. I have a bad case of diarrhea. Your body cannot contain the bowels, it can't form them properly, and they just come out loose, and you might have a lot of cramps and feel really uncomfortable, and you feel nauseous, and you're going to vomit and things like that. So that food has injured your body, and as soon as that food's passed through you, especially if you go back to a very clear, bland diet, that easy to digest diet, you help your spleen, you don't kind of overwhelm it, and you treat it nicely, then you should go back to kind of somewhat normal digestion, especially if you started out with kind of normal digestion. It should go back to being normal because you're not bombarding your body with this illness all the time. And so that's an instance where you have dampness. So that's sort of, the reason why I'm going off that tangent is to kind of clarify that idea of like, well, you only get damp by your spleen being unable to digest what you put in it. So either the food you put in it is just completely toxic and bad for you, like a food poisoning situation, or over time you're bombarding it with this stuff like the sugar, the carbs, and so that brings me to this point of, is dampness caused by sugar and carbs, or is it caused by fat, or both of those things? So I think if you just have the fat and you don't have the sugar and the carbs, and it's not trans fats, it's just like natural fats from food, so things like avocados, things like animal fats, like fat from, typically on these kinds of diets, they don't encourage you to have the processed meats, right? So they encourage you to have natural meats, like a steak with the fat on it, or you're having a bone broth, which is very dense in the fat and the rich, like congealing gelatin of animal substances. Even if you're having a lot of avocados, let's say, and you're on a vegan keto style diet, I think it's less dampening than we think it probably is. I think that the dampness over time, this is what I've kind of come to the conclusion, is that dampness is caused by the fats, the sugars, the trans fats, all of those things, or some of those things, like the combination of those, or those by themselves, are the things that are causing the dampness more than just the fat aspect. And this is kind of supported by diet thinking. So, in the 80s, let's say the Pritikin diet was really popular, which was a high carbohydrate, a high fiber diet, and I think pretty low fat, right? The Pritikin diet was a really, like in the 80s, like it was very popular to have low fat foods, thinking that that's, how you avoid putting on weight. And now the tables have turned because we've got new technology to kind of understand that. Yeah, one of the issues with Chinese diet therapy is, I think, you've got a lot of texts out there that just kind of quoting the same stuff, and I don't necessarily think, and I question kind of where that source information comes from, because it's there's not as much source information of Chinese diet therapy as there is for acupuncture and herbal medicine. So it's kind of a little bit less reliable, and we have to infer that knowledge from the understanding, particularly for herbs. So when we understand herbs, we understand the nature and the flavour of herbs. Well, foods do the same thing. So if salty in a herb does something, salty in a food is going to do that same kind of thing. But this dampness thing, I've seen this a lot in lots of books where they say, oh, well, these meats are fatty meats, or so those things cause dampness. And something you have to constantly consider is not just that food in isolation, but that food within the whole diet. So if a person has a general Western American diet where they eat carbs and they eat sugar, and then they have a lot of animal fats on top of that, I think that's going to cause dampness. It's going to be a problem. But then we don't really know. Is it those animal fats that are causing the dampness, or the oils that are causing the dampness, or is it the carbs? And is it the combination? If they weren't in combination with those carbs, would they not cause the dampness? One of the things you could do for yourself is to just be entirely observant, and I encourage my patients to do this when they take on a new diet or they're trying something new, is to just keep a little journal and to note down every day. Like, you could rate your pain, you could rate how you feel. If you have had issues with dampness and you have foggy headedness, then you could rate, like, you know, on 1 to 5 of how foggy headed you feel when you change different diets, or how much clarity of thinking you have. And so that's something where, like, these are the main symptoms of dampness, is the foggy headedness. So you feel like this vice kind of foggy head, that's bloated or abdominal distension. That's often associated with in TCM, that spleen qi deficiency. And your bowels are the main one, right? And the tiredness, like the tiredness in terms of how heavy you feel in your body. Like, my legs are heavy, I can't be bothered moving around. That's a damp kind of a symptom. But your bowels, so if your bowels are getting better, they're getting more consolidated and more properly formed, and you've gone from someone who's been having loose, sticky, hard to digest food in your stools, or just looser, and it's gone to being more consolidated, then that's a sign that your spleen's working better. Now, sometimes on a keto diet, people can get constipation, which is hard to move their bowels. And so they might just need more fiber in their diet. They might need to pay attention to what they're eating. So on a blanket scale, we can't just say, well, in general, this diet's great or not great, because how people actually play that diet out, actually how they do it, can be different. So the other things the other things to consider is the diet, are they eating a lot of raw foods? So that would contribute to more dampness. Are they using a lot of frying, cooking methods? That would contribute to more dampness. But just the fact that they're eating those oils and eating those low carb foods, I think if they're losing weight and that person was very overweight, then I think that would mean that there's less dampness there. So I hope that this is useful and helpful to you. The other thing you could notice for dampness is a tongue coating. So the coating of the tongue is the dirty dregs of digestion. And often you'll notice that tongue coating change. If you've got damp heat, it'll be very bright yellow and thick and greasy. And your tongue body, I wouldn't really be too concerned about the body of your tongue for a diet like this, because the body of your tongue takes a long time to change, and it's just can be really confusing. But the coating of your tongue, that's something to take notice of. So especially if it changes for the worse, like it's getting thicker and you feel that furriness in your mouth, then maybe you are eating too much density and your body's having a difficult time digesting that. But again, I think that's probably more the carbs and the sugar. And if you take that completely out of the diet, so in the keto diet, I didn't really explain what that is. I'm just assuming people watching this video know what that is, so go and watch another video about ketosis. But your body it's basically not needing, because you're not giving it any carbohydrates. It doesn't have insulin going through its system. So if you're in a state of ketosis, you don't have insulin pumping around in your body, and then your body loses that signal to store the fat. So that's one aspect that stops you from putting on weight. So when you eat a carbohydrate food, or you eat a sugary food, a food with carbohydrates or sugar, your body needs insulin to digest that. So it pumps out insulin into your bloodstream, and then the presence of insulin is a signal for your body to store fat. So if you don't have insulin, then your body's not storing the fat. And that's the basic principle of losing weight by being in ketosis. So your body's not storing fat. It's in a state of using fats. So it's not in a state of storing fats, it's in a state of using fat for fuel. Now, initially when you go on a keto diet, or you go on any kind of low carb diet, especially if the person's come from a high carb diet, let's say, then they will feel tired initially, because their body is learning to get energy in a new way. And that person could feel like, so I guess what I'm saying is you might feel the symptoms of dampness for a couple of days. You might feel tired. You might feel like, oh, I feel foggy headed, and you might actually just feel vexed and annoyed because you're craving the sugar and your brain is trying to get off that sugar, and it's trying to get off that sugar train. Like it wants that sugar, and it's trying to sort of screaming out inside you for those carbs or that sugar. And if you don't give it to it, then, you know, it takes a few days to kind of get past that point of that intense craving for it. So, yeah, this is something that I've kind of experimented with the last couple of weeks. I've done the paleo diet before for a while, probably 6 months or so in the past. And the thing that made me not stick on it was probably going out for food with people, because it was very hard to, you know, exist in society on such a restrictive diet when you go out. And if you go out a lot, you know, that tended to, then I just lost track of it. You have to cook a lot for yourself. So you're just busy cooking, you know, and you have to plan a lot. And at that point in my life, I was just so busy doing other things. I didn't stick on it. But since this lockdown situation with the, you know, the staying at home more and with the virus thing, the COVID virus in the world, the last 10 days I've been on a, I wouldn't say purely keto, but I've definitely been doing a low carb version of a paleo diet. So very low carbs, and, you know, by default paleo's no sugar and no grains. So, that's, you know, that's for my personal benefit. Like, and definitely I can tell you now, like, I mean, I don't suffer with, foggy headed kind of dampness, but, you definitely feel clearer in your brain. Like, it does take a few days to kick in. And so I would say that sometimes people, you know, would start a diet like that, and then they find it hard to stick on it because, or they might think, oh, this is making my dampness worse, because they feel that cloudy headedness in the first few days. But after that, then these are the questions you should ask yourself. Is my digestion better? Is it more in line with, you know, the spleen chi? Is it helping my spleen chi? Does my digestion seem like it's helping my spleen chi? So if overall that diet is supporting a healthier spleen or earth element function, then you could say that it's less likely to cause dampness. Whereas if it's wreaking havoc on that spleen chi, it's very hard to digest that. And so just finally, the one last thing I've put in there is, I think I mentioned at the start of the video, like if you have too much processed food on a keto diet, so you can have that. You can get these little bars that are like, you know, keto bars, or you know, whey protein things, and you're having a lot of protein powders and shakes. If you combine that with too much raw, or you have a lot of processed, and I don't think many people who do a keto diet do that because they want to be healthy. But I know there's always these extreme of the spectrum, and people think, oh, I can have nuts on that. I'm going to have a massive bag of nuts. You would never eat a whole bag of nuts in a day. You just have, and you can have extremes that make those things then more unhealthy. So just because it's allowed on that diet doesn't necessarily mean you should have unlimited amounts of that, or, you know, too much of something. And so if you're having these kind of meal replacement bars or shakes, then I think those things can be dampening because they tend to be on that processed side. They have a lot more yin than yang. But if you're freshly cooking things, so you're freshly cooking the meats and the vegetables, and with all these diets, and even if it's a low carb diet, doesn't mean you have to be, you know, eat a massive amount of meat. So you should have, you know, lots of vegetables so that you are getting a wide variety of nutrients into your body as well. The other, I guess, argument with the keto diet, you know, from a Chinese medicine perspective, is you're having a huge amount of protein, and it's harder to digest that protein. So therefore that places a strain on the spleen and stomach. That's the argument that's said. But I think relative to what the person alternatively would be eating, grains aren't necessarily a bad thing in Chinese medicine, but the way that grains are promoted is like a small bowl of freshly cooked rice or barley or millet or that pure grain, not so much breads and flours and doughs, and that combination delicious combination of, you know, creamy things with mixing the creamy things with the carbs. I guess the other thing to possibly think about with the keto diet is that you could consume a lot of dairy on that diet. So you're meant to have all these fat, and you need the fats to kind of help you feel full. And so if you're having a lot of cream and a lot of dairy, lots and lots of cheese, that kind of stuff, that in itself could probably be dampening. So if you're following a paleo kind of keto diet, I think that would be healthier from a Chinese medicine perspective. So where it could possibly come undone or become more dampening would be if you were on a keto diet and you had tons of dairy, not many vegetables, you had these kind of keto bars and processed bars and raw smoothies every day. I think that kind of keto diet might become dampening, but if you stick to a mostly cooked, you're eating things freshly, you kind of have a moderate amount of meat with plenty of vegetables, and, you know, a moderate amount of dairy, not tons of dairy, then, you know, I think it would be beneficial to you. My general consensus is that the keto diet is not dampening if you do it properly. You do it sensibly, and you stick to you also, especially if you follow the Chinese medicine way, and you stick to mostly cooked foods, and you stick to mostly fresh and not so much processed foods, I don't see how it could contribute to dampness. So I hope that this video has been useful and helpful to you, and you may have a contrary opinion. So maybe you think I've missed something, please put that in the comments below, and I look forward to seeing you again on the next video soon. Have a great day. Thanks for listening to the Chinese Medicine Podcast. Did you know we're also on TikTok? And you can find shorter videos on Facebook and Instagram that you might like to share with your friends and family. You can also find our podcast on Apple, Spotify, and all places where you listen to audio podcasts. I look forward to seeing you again on the next video soon. Processed things, that certainly would cause a more dampening effect. Fucking helicopter coming past now. Great. The popo are here. It's either that or some kind of emergency. It's not a bushfire.